And we have begun. All right. Let me give you the lowdown. I let me give you all the lowdown. I understand what is going on, and I'm going to try to do a better job, at least for now. Well, hopefully going forward, but specifically for now, to make sure that I tell you when I'm giving you stuff that's strictly context or stuff I just want to go through, and stuff that specifically you're going to have to know for the test. That's what I'm trying to do to make. I feel maybe I didn't do a good enough job. Like I said, when things don't go your way, I don't. It's wrong. Teachers do it all the time. Oh, the class isn't studying. They're not smart. It's wrong. I mean, it's unfair and it's pejorative, and it just shows a lack of understanding of people. I mean, it would be stupid for me or anyone else to say you're not trying because I know you're trying. Okay. How much? That's up to you. The reality is, I have to. If there's problems, I have to do a better job, and at least for now, trying to clarify with all this. And I see what you're looking at there. All that you have to study. I told all the other classes, it's not your special, despite what you think. Joking. So, and hopefully everything once this is concluded. No other. I've been here for almost 20 years. We've never done this. We've never had a situation where a relatively large A&P1 class of students taking over 120 roughly have had to go through this and do the lab in half the time, and therefore doubling the work in a very, I mean, it's simple. You're doing 15, 16 weeks now and have to be stuck listening to me with other scientific stuff. So I understand that. To that end, I mean, I realized that, and I tried to do it with the first exam. I tried to work around it. I attribute a lot of the problems associated with it. And so I had told my wife about that 10%, 30, 30, 30, which I'm willing to do. But the reality is, I mean, if it is beneficial, and she said, why don't you just drop the worst exam that any of these things? And maybe that's the way to go. I mean, so I'll do whatever is beneficial for you. I would never drop. Somebody got a good grade. I had a few emails. Please don't drop this. I would never do that. If I have different ways of evaluating the information, if somebody had bombed the first exam and did great the other exams, you're going to obviously take that. Or somebody did great and in the third exam had a big fight with their significant other and couldn't focus. I understand that. So I'm going to try to do that. So thank her. I'll try. She said, you will drop. I knew just how to answer her. They're telling me what to do in school. Yes, dear. Exactly what I did. You'll learn. Yes, dear's work. I know you're already demanding. You get the idea. So let's try to get you through this. I can see we're not going to make any headway until the lab is over. So obviously, and so I'm probably looking hard at the 29th to have this exam. We're going to finish bones surely by Monday, even with me blabbing about this now. Probably sometime Monday we'll finish bones. And then I understand you didn't even touch joints in lab. Yeah, I'm gonna have to throw joints on. I usually do the physiology. I'll at least acquaint you with the structure. It's the kind of stuff you probably don't have to know. You do have to understand how joints move. That's it. All the classifications and stuff, I think we can forgo some of that. Because that's more just rote memorization, and you're already, information overload is upon you. It's hard. It gets worse. Trust me, it gets worse. I'm getting stories on what's going on with the students who were in your position last year. Thank you. All right, let me get started here. There's not a ton to do today, and I'll try to go. And I now know the stuff I could probably skip. This is really, we're looking at how bone develops, and effectively, bone starts to develop early on. So we're starting to see effectively the cartilaginous shell and even some of the bones already starting to appear as they go from cartilage to bone. This is a little bit different. And we can tell this because we have the luxury now of ultrasound. Years ago, we did not have that. And then you really didn't want to take x-rays because x-rays could harm the fetus or the embryo. So the reality is, this is really giving us a lot of information about it. And our bones do grow. And when they talk about early adulthood, we're going to talk about basically your bones stop growing, particularly in an elongation sense. Roughly for women, for gals between 16 and 18, and for guys, maybe 18 to 21. Okay. So, but they're constantly, as you see, this is the chapter where they discuss this constant remodeling that's going on. It's all changed. Your original bones, the original equipment is long gone. And it underscores a really important part of all of this course to understand that other than really that whole thing with the cell cycle, okay, when it exits the cell cycle and now it can't undergo mitosis anymore, that stuff's the only stuff that's around. Your brain, your heart, your skeletal muscles, your smooth muscles, all of those, we can't replace them. Everything else is replaceable, more or less, bones included. That's the beauty of the system. That's there. So the notion that this is the original equipment goes away, and that's the great thing about it, is because it's replaceable. We can replace it unless we get to some things that are so densely constructed, and blood, it's like tendons and ligaments and stuff like that. They just don't heal because they just don't have enough blood supply. Okay, we have to replace those things artificially, or reinforce them artificially. So this is where it tries to tie. I'm trying to give you the tie-in. None of this stuff is really dramatic. The 16 to 18 and the 18 to 21, that's important stuff. But that's the first thing to understand. What I focus on is very little intramembranous and a whole lot of enchondral or endochondral. It means bone forms out of cartilage. All the cartilage is hyaline cartilage. 3 types of cartilages. I know you had that. Elastic and fibrous. Not in this discussion. I left my drink in the other room. But we'll get through it. Intramembranous, basically skull bones, clavicles, and why it forms, we really don't understand why magically bone forms in these other kinds of fibrous tissue, other than the fact that they all come from this common cell line we call mesenchymal cells. Fancy name, but basically it can change into fibrous and cartilage and bone. You saw that with fibroblasts, chondroblasts, and osteoblasts. They can go backwards and forwards from one another. And you'll see that in the point we reinforced on Friday, because we'll probably get to fracture healing. Maybe we will, maybe we won't. So this is the enchondral, okay? Other than anything really below the base of the skull, except for the clavicles, hyaline cartilage models, they talk about these primary ossification centers, okay? Effectively, cartilage is killed, lack of a better term, destroyed by blood. When blood supply invades cartilage, it starts the process of death. The closer it is to blood supply, the more rapidly it dies. Effectively, that's, if you want to paint it with a very, very broad brush and simplify it, that's what happens. When an athlete injures a joint and there's bleeding into a joint, that joint, the cartilage that is at the ends of that joint that make up moving joints, begins to erode and get damaged. Whether or not it hurts them, whether or not they get arthritis when they're adults, that there's a lot of variables. But by definition, there is going to be damage done. So that's the first thing to understand about it. Okay. And so effectively, when we look at the cartilaginous model or shell, it has very, very similar shape-wise early on with the bone it's going to become, tops and bottoms, a shaft, because we're really looking at the long bone, and a sheath that, unlike the periosteum I went into chapter and verse of, is made of something called perichondrium. That's as soon, almost magically, that starts to change to bone as soon as blood comes into the picture. But there's other signals, and that's why I don't want to get into all this elaborate thing. And that's these process of the bone collar and this kind of stuff. I'd rather show it to you rather than sit there and have you memorize step by step. One, it's not worth it. It really is not. It doesn't really tell the story. The story is you're going to see the 3 different areas where there's blood supply, the differences in the bone at those areas, and then we're going to look closely at really a lot of this at the growth plate. The growth plate is the structural weak point in growing bone. Fractures occur in the growth. Very rarely they don't, unless it's a big time accident. And secondarily, I'll even show you, and you will need to know the exact area in the growth plate which is the weakest. And you'll find that is where, interestingly, the cartilage begins to change and die, and if it starts to calcify. When things get damaged in the human body, they begin to get calcium in them, the ones that shouldn't. Bone is supposed to have the calcium, the other stuff doesn't. So calcification where it shouldn't occur is not a good thing. It's usually something we look for. When we look at people when they're older, and you take an x-ray, and all of a sudden you're looking and you see blood vessels calcifying around their heart or in their abdomen, that's bad circulation. In their extremities, that's bad circulation. You see that in diabetics in their legs and feet all the time. It's never coming back. That means the damage is so severe, even the repair process is not going to be. I'm trying to give you some context about things like that. Okay, here. Let's look at the illustrations. It's easier rather than me just narrating, and you've got enough stuff to do reading-wise. I'm trying to be sympathetic to your problem. Number one, so why this bone collar? I don't know. But effectively, this is what a typical long bone is, cartilaginous shell. At some juncture, whenever the point is in, it varies from bone to bone. Not so much individual to individual. Forensically, meaning we look for when growth plates are present or not, or if bones are starting to change from cartilage to bone to age, like a skeletal remains in a child that we might find. That's how it is done, or it's even done retrospectively for remains that are found from a long time ago. So there's a lot of, I used to know all the times and stuff like that. That was stuff I needed to know for my head, for my orthopedic roots. But that's 40 years ago. Even I forget. And so all of a sudden, when this collar appears, we begin to see changes. Best thing for me to tell you, this is the big player. This is the primary blood supply. That's what I told you about before in the other diagrams. This is called the nutrient foramen, the main blood supply entering the bone. What effectively it does is it accelerates this transition, and the shaft of the bone forms with mostly hard cortical bone on the outside, cancellous bone, marrow cavity, etc. Shortly thereafter, okay, the epiphyseal, the ends of the bones are called epiphyses. That's the plural, singular is epiphysis. You can talk about proximal distal, superior and inferior, it doesn't matter to me. That's more of a lab question. But effectively, they have their own blood supply. And when that blood supply enters that bone, it's different. You have mostly cancellous bone and a little cortical bone on the outside, where the shafts here, down the road, you'll see, are a lot of cortical bone. That's the strength. The ends of the bones, not that they're not strong, but it's by comparison. And this area, what's left, cartilage that forms the joint, is all that's left of the original cartilaginous shell. So we call that articular cartilage. Articular means it forms a joint. Those are important things. The area between the epiphyses and the diaphyses, even in growing bone rather, is highlighted by, and there's usually two, okay, is highlighted by growth plate, also known as the epiphyseal plate. I use the terms interchangeably. If I write growth plate, it means epiphyseal plate. Right, epiphyseal plate means growth plate. Just like a lot of students did with an exam, you have the luxury of coming up here and saying, is this what you mean? And a lot of times I'll give you an answer. A lot of times I'll say, I can't give you an answer. Okay. I've even had the older students ask me, because I use big words a fair amount. What does this word mean? It comes with the territory. It's okay. My wife says I use big words when I'm talking out of my posterior. Right. So you got it. You probably got it too, but you're still busy on one of those diagrams. Pectoral, trapezius, gluteus, ductor magnus, longus. All those, right? Are they all in there? I even know. Sorry. Don't know anything about intramembrane ossification. I know all about it, but nobody really knows why magically in fibrous tissue we start to form a bone. It's like a sandwich. It's got cortical bone on the outside. Your skull, perfect example. They're flat bones. They have thin, not overly thin, but not as big as a long bone, cortical bone, and the outside, and it sandwiches the cancellous bone on the inside. So the large skull bones are all part of it. Maybe the other ones are a little different, don't know. It's called intramembranous ossification. Don't care about this. I mean, who knows how this magically occurs? The end product, and you saw one in the previous PowerPoint that they showed a couple of times, and indeed you'll probably see it again with osteoporosis. Effectively, this becomes the cortical, the compact bone, the lamellar layered bone, osteons, although thinner than a long bone, and this becomes cancellous bone and maybe some marrow associated with it. The two types of growth. Interstitial growth is elongation. Same thing happens in cartilage when cartilage is growing, except they don't have all these interesting transition zones that we're going to go into. Interstitial is the process of elongation. Effectively, that ends when your bones reach bone maturity, meaning the growth plates have closed. It drives me crazy. And in the earlier, they talk about something called an epiphyseal line. I have never seen one. I operated on bones for 25 years. So some magic structure that you see. Oh, when the growth plates disappear, it forms an epiphyseal line. I've never seen it. And I've had a whole lot of bones in my hands. I'm not talking about skeletal bones out there. I'm talking about inside the person. I don't get it. So I never ask a question about that if you're wondering. Could you detect with sufficient resources that we have today the area where the growth plate was? Possibly. I think that's what they're referring to. What bones continue to do, and even they're doing when they're growing, is called appositional growth, shape. And what happens for you and I, as effectively with our bones, for all intents and purposes, or all the growth plates are closed, they reshape. We redistribute the bone to a certain extent. Sometimes, and mostly with regard to activity, mostly with regard to our inactivity, occupations, injuries, things like that. But the reality is they're not going to get longer. Okay? We can artificially make them longer by surgical means. It's something I mentioned to the other class. It's been around for a while. It's the kind of thing you do in some individuals with really bad injuries. Particularly, we used to see a lot of IEDs, explosive injuries, and things like that, where pieces of bone were lost, and you really didn't have enough grafting material. It actually is a method to try to elongate the bones. It was developed interestingly as an aside, which means no questions about that, by a Russian physician to treat a very, very famous, one of the greatest high jumpers of all time. The first man to break the 7-foot barrier in the high jump. Who had a bad fracture, and to try to get him back into training. Well, the method of Ilizarov was a physician, and the Russian high jumper, I'm going to tell you either 64 or 68, Valery Brumel. I'm a sportsaholic. It's what I am. Keeping on going. Okay, and again, sometimes we'll see people facial bone wise, just for fun. As you get older, 10, 15 years, go back and look at your high school yearbook and see if you know some people, or you see them at a reunion or something like that. Just check to see if their faces have changed. I mean, I've gone to a couple of those, 40 and 50 to be exact. And remarkable how many the faces do appear to change. Some of them don't. Some people remarkably look the same. So sometimes you see some changes that are pretty distinctive. I tell my wife, I look the same. She goes, have you looked in the mirror recently? Honest to goodness, she said it in my 40s. You all look so old. Did you look at yourself, buddy? So, in order for it to grow, you got to have a growth plate. The growth plate stays the same. This is the magic. So take a moment. Growth plate here, growth plate here. Effectively, what happens is the growth plate stays the same, and it creates new bone here. Growth plate stays the same, and it creates new bone here. And so the ends get farther away, and effectively the shaft what elongates. The ends will remodel, and yeah, maybe they'll get a little larger too. But basically, the growth is shaft-wise, and this process is explained. And what's happening is kind of triggered by chemicals, and those chemicals in our bodies we call them hormones. Hormones that play the biggest role, probably with any growth spurt. There's a pre-adolescent growth spurt, or post-adolescent growth spurt. Okay. In addition to human growth hormone, that's typically the biggest of all the players. As you will see shortly, in women is estrogen, and in men is. And indeed, down the road, levels of these two get very high and probably induce the end of growth. So it's interesting, and a lot of times we see this biologically, where a certain level will generate one thing, but a higher or a lower level may generate something totally different. Pretty interesting. So continue to move on. So all of these zones, so the plate stays the same. It's the rate on one side, balance, and they call that balancing replacement the other. These are the zones. You don't have to know all the zones. In medical school, I had to know all the zones, all the changes and what happened in each one of them. I'm just trying to give you this for context. And so what happens, okay, and this is on the epiphyseal side is relatively inactive, the top or the bottom, in the middle, very active. So the cartilage on the side of the shaft, okay, is where it starts to grow because the blood supply is in here. As the cartilage increases, this is closer to the blood supply. It's going to have a tendency to grow there, particularly in the presence of those chemical agents that are there. And so the new cells formed, they really don't move upward so much as they think of it as pushing the growth plate away. So at first it proliferates, and then as it begins to get more of them, they're getting pushed closer and closer toward the center in the blood supply. And the blood, still being a nutrient and things like that, with nutrients being available, oxygen being available, you're going to start to see these cells enlarge. And when they enlarge, now they're getting closer and closer, and they start to die. The enlargement is followed shortly after by them calcifying. That is the phase where the fractures really occur. That is the structural weak point within the epiphyseal plate, which is the structural weak point in the bone itself. It's called the zone of calcified cartilage, or the calcification zone. And then all of a sudden, magically, it's bone. Better to show it than talk about it. We'll look at x-rays next time. We'll look at fractures. So how do I know this? I mean, this is distal femur, proximal tibia. Why is this a growth plate other than they're showing us there in the little square shows what we're looking at? Okay. Why couldn't this have just been a bad accident? What you do is when you see typically fracture lines are not smooth and rounded, they're irregular. Living systems don't make sharp turns. Okay? So how do you be sure of, oh, my knee is killing me on this side but not the other side? Because I took a fall, I went down hard on my knee, and a little kid's telling you this, or a teenager. What happens is we x-ray both sides. Here, if you see something that's on the unaffected side, that's on the affected side rather, that's different looking in the growth plates, that's how you would identify whether there is a fracture of the growth. if you're involved in patient care, do not be dismissive of people's complaints. In the old days, a lot of these were missed because people, oh, you've got growing pains. Where I come from, pain means problem. So never be judgmental and think that the person's complaints are not real. It's the same thing as me not having a certain amount of sympathy and compassion for the predicament you're in. I mean, the presumption that someone's lying to you for whatever reason, it's not a good thing to be in that. I mean, you have to be the word would be jaded to think everybody is doing things like this. Let me say a bad word. Say yes at you, but I didn't want to say that. That's like, wait, this is more my kind of a size class. Can we get these other people not to come? 4, 6, 8, 12, 14. Good. Just over the halfway mark. So take a look at this. Here's the cartilage at rest. This is the actual photomicrograph, meaning this is what it looks like microscopically. Here, proliferating. Here, hypertrophy. You see it's large, it's expanding. Here, as soon as it's getting close to the bone down here, changes dramatically. That's where it weakens. The zone of calcified cartilage. Same thing drawing here. So remember that. Calcification zone, zone of calcified cartilage. I guess that's a test question. One of the skills that you'll get when you can focus more on me, or on anybody, any professor, any teacher, is the little signals they give you. Most of us sit and talk about how I told them everything that's on the test. How can they not know what's being on the test? You're trying desperately not to give the store away, but if you listen closely, you can't help it. It's a skill. It comes with time. So I'm going to try to be as expressive as possible. So near the end of adolescence, as you all know, it's basically, it stops, it's thin, it's replaced by bone, and we call it epiphyseal or growth plate closure. And now it's all bone. Understand, cartilage is very strong there. It's not like it's shifting around. But effectively, and I'll talk about growth plate fractures next time, when that shifts suddenly enough, when it gives, it hurts like anything, just like a regular fracture. Bone lengthening in females, I'd say 16 to 18, and probably I think closer to 16. And in males, 18 to 21. And everybody's different. I reached my maximum adult height when I was in 9th grade. What am I going to tell you? Yeah, I have 2 nephews, my sister's 2 boys, both grew 3 or 4 inches in college. Okay, 1'6" and 1 6'1". They went in like 5'9", 5'10". Go figure. My boys, not biologically related, they grew, my one, maybe a couple inches when they reached that same age. They were there. Best anecdote about that, very, very famous basketball player, was on San Antonio Spurs' first championship team, which might have been 88. David Robinson, known as the Admiral, might have been on the second one too. He came from the Naval Academy. He came in as a 6'4" point guard. After his first year there, he was a 7'1" center. 9 inches. Unusual, I'll grant you, but he had the skills of a point guard. That's what made him unique. He only had to serve 2 years. It's a 4-year hitch if you didn't know, from a service academy. He had to serve 2 years. He only served 2 years. He was so tall he couldn't get through the hatches on ships. I mean, submariners, they don't even take him over 6'4". But if you've ever been on an actual ship, like a destroyer, height is not your friend. You're going to whack your head a lot. Tallest guy on my son's ship probably wasn't any more than 6'4", 6'5". So, the thickness, they widen as they lengthen. This is appositional growth through life. Stressors, weight bearing, what you do for a living, what sports you do. Do you work out like crazy in the gym? Are you a power lifter? Pick something, okay? Or are you very, very sedentary? I mean, it just follows. The more active you are, the more it's full of slaw. Bone adapts to the forces that are on them. If you put more force on them, they're going to thicken and enlarge. Weightlifters are going to have big trochanters. People who are very sedentary and don't do any physical activity or minimal amount, well, they won't have very, very distinctive. That's why the bones we see, when we see real bones, have a wide variation. And this is it. And it's just an interchange. And we're going to see how the osteoclasts work, how the osteoblasts work, sort of in concert. And so effectively what you're doing is you're redistributing the bone in such a way, it's a glorified cylinder. And how do we make the walls in such a way that the side of the wall that's getting pressed on is thicker and the side of the wall that's getting stretched or bent is a little thinner, so it can deal with it, has more flexibility. And this is part of the magic that our bones do. And they're just showing you, it's not a great illustration, it doesn't do a lot for me, but here's what it looked like before the bone grew. Here's the growth plate moving farther away. Here's the rest of the bone. If we trace this, you can see the distinctive change. We've moved bone from point A to point B, so to speak. This is the part I wrote on the board. In addition to human growth hormone, which is active throughout your life, particularly active at times of growth spurts, other than ones that are related to estrogen. Thyroid hormone governs your body's metabolic rate. Thyroid hormone is normal, and most of ours is. And basically, your body's working in a normal way. But endocrine, look at all of these. So if someone is normal, you call normal thyroid, euthyroid. It's like your car starts up just fine. If you're hypothyroid, they're very sluggish. It's like my 150,000 plus mile Tiguan going. Some morning it's older. It's entitled, it takes some time to start. Or it's like somebody with a race, with a muscle car, we used to call them, when gas was a little bit cheaper. Okay, you start it up like my boys did, loud noises. That's sort of the way that's hyperthyroid. So your body, your metabolic rate is controlled by the thyroid, and not just bone, everything. Repro, cardiovascular, endocrine, circulatory. If your thyroid is involved, and when you look at an endocrine, you're going to see it plays a major role in nearly every body system. So don't underestimate the importance of the thyroid. Okay, proper proportions, etc. Here's the testosterone, estrogen. Really, those big growth spurts are there in the end growth closure. And in endocrine, you go into the abnormalities: giantism, dwarfism, something called acromegaly, where there's an excessive amount of human growth hormone post bone closure. Really causes significant distortions and things like that. And here's the idea of the recycling process of it. So all of your bone, the spongy portions, by your age is 4 or 5 times. Your compact bone, probably twice. And so all of the way that responds, and yes, there's signals from stress sensing, and this is what those osteocytes do when they were together in the canaliculi. They're sending chemical and electrical signals. Oh, he's back at the gym again. What are we going to do? That type of thing. Give me a break. See, I think they talk to each other. I am sure our cat does. He communicates. So, osteoclasts, how do they work? This is important also. They release enzymes. You see the name of the enzymes in a second, rather than me having to get up and write it up. They generally, the combination of, remember lysosomes, enzymes for destruction and defense, they break down the proteins that make up the osteoid. It's both. It's the mineral and the non-mineral. The organic osteoid, and then the acidity helps to break down, additionally, the mineral, the calcium salts, and it all becomes digested. Basically, all of those things are transported through this sort of a giant cell that has multiple macrophages and basically releases the calcium into the circulation. And I'll come up and show you that in a second. So the osteoclasts also gobble up things, and interestingly enough, they're done. Understand, that's the other underscore point. All cells have a lifespan, with the exception of, again, the brain, skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle, smooth muscle. All these other cells are constantly turned over. The osteoclasts are really not an unusual cell, but they're really a big cluster, a unique cluster of white blood cells that are part of the digestive processes, except their job is about digesting bone and the signals they get. And we're done, and then we keep remaking them because it's like they're spent, then they really no longer have an ability. And I don't do this osteoid seam or calcification. When we go back and we start to calcify, okay, the reverse. When we're putting bone in, we make more organic material or osteoid, and then that binds the calcium, okay. And this is the chemical. This alkaline phosphatase is a really important chemical in a lot of organs that we study to look for abnormality. If it's unusually active or unusually present from bone, it indicates there's something going on in the bone. In the liver, it indicates something going on in the liver. It's one of those things we measure. When a patient has, and many of you have had it, when they do what we call BMP, basic metabolic panel, and that's about 18 to 24 tests. Alk-Phos is the way you refer to it in the trade, is one of them. That's context. You're not going to have to know that stuff and what it does. But the name hydroxyapatite, please know that. Mostly calcium phosphate. The big player is calcium. Is there some magnesium? Is there some carbonate, etc., etc.? This is the mechanism. It's all about negative calcium metabolism. The whole idea is bone to vein. And negative feedback, when we need more calcium, blood clot, how the heart, how the brain, how the muscles, everything. We need more, we put it into the bloodstream. When we have too much, we put it back into the bone. It's constant. Negative feedback. So when I say, we need a little bit more, we need some from the bone. As soon as the body senses it, okay, slow down. Don't want to take a lot of the bone right away. So parathyroid hormone, PTH is, we always see that acronym. That's used that in the hospital chart. Parathyroid hormone is produced by the parathyroid gland. It's what it makes. Action has three actions, principally on bone by way of those osteoclasts, and effectively it breaks down. Remember, both the bone itself, not just releasing the calcium salts, but also the organic material is broken down. That's why it plays a pivotal role in our understanding of osteoporosis, which we do at the end of this chapter. And the end product of this is it increases calcium in the bloodstream. It also signals the stomach in the presence of vitamin D, which is another hormone the skin makes. Sunlight activates the skin. I know you have that in the skin. Everybody does. And that's one of the things what makes it a hormone that works together with parathyroid hormone in the gastrointestinal tract to absorb calcium. When it absorbs it, right, puts it back into the blood, increases in the bloodstream. Parathyroid almost tells the kidney, hold on. In other words, don't urinate out the calcium. When you're with the calcium again, the bloodstream. Three different ways. The one in the gut from diet by way of vitamin D. Typically, we use calcium carbonate. It's preferable because the other calciums that you might use have a greater tendency to produce things like kidney stones are a big problem, particularly in young people. Starting to see an increase, particularly in young people. Is it dietary? Is it dieting? Is there supplements don't matter? And then lastly, calcitonin is made by your thyroid, and most authors believe it's principally active in growing bone, and we may be able to use it in adult bone in a high amount. Active in growing bone, and it's the opposite. It takes calcium from the blood, puts it into bone, and therefore it lowers That's, that's the feedback, negative feedback. Subtle adjustments around the sector. And all of that's really important. We're getting there. So this is just getting, you're going to be so tired of hearing about calcium in the next few chapters. Because after we finish bone and a little bit about joints, it's nerve and muscle phys, the heart of this course as far as I'm concerned. And it's all about calciums and potassiums and sodiums, as well as understanding the other processes that are there. So it's critical, okay? Nerves don't fire, muscles don't contract, blood doesn't clot. Your bones hold a total, that's about 3 pounds if you want to do the conversion. 99% of the roughly 3 pounds of calcium are found in bones, okay? And we need the vitamin D. Here's the parathyroid hormone, which I put up there is what you want, really what you need. You can read through this. The calcitonin is odd in response to high levels of blood calcium. You see, the funny thing is, in children, it's not negligible. In adults, we don't understand it, but we do think that, and there's been some experimentation, if calcitonin in some way can be used to treat osteoporosis in adults. There's no magic pill for osteoporosis. They all have a lot of side effects. And I mean, you're all young. Many of you are going to suffer with osteoporosis when you get older. The time to start treating it is now. And I'm going to reinforce that when we talk about what goes on with osteoporosis, to be taking calcium supplements, to be taking vitamin D supplements. Super important. And I would say more so right now for women than for men, but I think it's like important in both. And it's a lifetime thing. We've got a lot of good supplements out today. Don't be afraid to take them. Study them. So tiny things. Okay, you're going to see this with calcium and potassium. Calcium is sometimes, neuromuscular in general, broad brush. If you don't have enough, nerves and muscles can't fire. If you have too much, sometimes, let me rephrase it. If you have calcium causes hyperexcitability, if it's low here, hyper, do not write any of those down. You have to know the specific example. And I'll show you the complexity of it. I don't love that slide, but this is the one I would take home. The high blood calcium levels leading to calcium salts in blood vessels. The more calcium, anything is injured. Blood vessels get injured all the time. We're constantly repairing them. If they're chronically injured, they become inflamed. Calcium gets deposited. That's when we see them on an x-ray, on a routine chest x-ray or something like that. It's like, oh, think of the word sugar. Somebody's got a big problem. You say aortic calcification, they've got cardiovascular disease for the duration of whatever their life is. Okay? Kidneys and stones, particularly. Here's calcitonin. Again, they talk about negligible. And then these other things. Cortisone-based things play a role. Vitamin D, I think, is very, very interesting. The indirectly means, does it play a role with, I don't know. I don't know what they're coming. I think they're talking about role with parathyroid. Here's the Wolff's Law part that I think is important to underscore. Grow or remodel in response to demands on them. And so the best way to look at this, where you're going to see it here. This area, here's all your weights coming down on your lower extremity by way of the hip joint. So where does it bend? Here's the force pushing the head of the femur, the head and neck down. It thickens here. It thickens. Interestingly enough, that thick area is where we can sometimes see tiny fractures. But it's there, the thickness comes from absorbing the weight. It has to be there. This gets thinner so it can bend. Because effectively, imagine every time you jumped up and down or hopped off a step ladder, like we all do, or miss a step, we're not breaking our hip. Understand, when grandma falls, okay, she didn't break the hip probably broke and grandma fell. That's the way it works. They usually go. Something that we're going to get to called a pathological fracture, which is much more common in adults than, say, in children, where most of the fractures are caused by trauma, accidents, sport, etc. So all of these things, thicker and stronger bone of the corresponding limb will have thicker areas of cortical bone. Curved bones are thickest where they're most likely to buckle. So that, if you look at that area, the femur, it's going to be thicker on the side that could buckle. We look at the trabecular bone. Remember that honeycomb area, like little supports. We look to see, we can start to see stress patterns, which might indicate the potential of a stress fracture. The hip is sometimes it's hard because usually it's osteoporotic bone. And here's the idea: the heavy projections for weightlifters and someone who's bedridden, they can atrophy dramatically, almost to the point where there's no way of changing it back to normal. That's there. And then this, I don't test on this. When I was in school in Philadelphia, Hospital University of Pennsylvania, I had a few patients we used this on. It's called electronic bone healing. We'd have casts, either permanent, casts that would be sawed off, or removable ones that had electrical plates. They have to plug themselves in for 8 to 12 hours overnight because they're charged particles over potential bad or poorly healing fractures. This would increase the likelihood of fracture. So it's studied. This is what happens. The fluids surround there generate an electrical current. We can hope to accelerate. It may or may not still be used. I have not practiced clinically in 25 years, so I do not know if it's still popular or not. I do not. So nor would I ever ask you a question about that. And basically that's it. We're going to start with fractures. First thing when you return here Friday. Thank you.